me move now to the essence, to use that word, of Plato's philosophy. Page 32. You cannot understand the most important things in this course. You cannot understand Plato's philosophy without understanding Plato's theory of the forms. Now, every time I teach this, I give my freshman students at my state university a sentence that they can use on their first hour exam. What I do is I say to them, you're going to have to write an essay for me on the first exam in which you explain Plato's theory of the forms. Here is the first sentence that you should use when you write that essay. And you know, half of them don't do it. Half of them will not use it. Let's see if you do any better, all right? Here, whenever you're called upon, I can imagine this will happen hundreds of times in your life. Whenever you are called upon to explain Plato's theory of the forms, always start with this sentence. You ready? Human beings, Plato believed that human beings participate or live in two different worlds. Isn't that great? Plato believed that human beings live in two different worlds. Let's stop for a moment. Let's see what a good teacher I am. Suppose that's the first sentence in your exposition of Plato's theory of the forms. What's the next sentence that you should write? What sentence follows naturally upon that first one? What do you do next? You explain the two worlds. Beautiful. Incredible. What a teacher. I can't believe how good I am, and I can't find my eraser. So what I'm going to do now is explain these two worlds. I'm going to use language that is simpler than Plato's. Plato didn't use these terms. Let's call one of these worlds, let's call it the lower world. Oh, the lower world. And let's call the other world, what do you think we should call it? The higher world. Boy. The higher world, all right? Now, the lower world is very easy to explain. What Plato called, or what I'm calling Plato's lower world, is the world that you have known from birth. It's the world of bodies. It's the physical universe. It's the world of this room. It's the world that contains your body, your book, your piece of paper, your pen, your table, your clothes, your automobile, your home, your Orlando tap water. All of that is a part of the physical universe. Another question. Oh, boy, this is so simple. How do we know this world? How do we become aware of the things that exist in this world? Sense perception. Experience. Sense perception. You see it, you touch it, you smell it, you taste it. Sense perception. Now watch this next move. You remember Heraclitus? Do you remember Heraclitus who said, everything changes, everything is in a state of flux, everything is moving? Plato said, Heraclitus was right. So long as you remember that when he talked about that world of changing things, he was describing the world of physical objects that we perceive through our senses. This is Heraclitus's world of change and flux. Most people believe that this is the only world that exists. When I deal with freshmen and sophomores and even seniors at the undergraduate level, I'm fighting with them. I'm trying to bring them to see that while this world certainly exists, it is not the only world. It may not even be the real world. So now let's begin to focus on this higher world. This world down here is a world of changing bodies in space and time, etc., etc. This higher world is what Plato calls the world of the forms. The world of the forms. Now, what is a form? Well, it's going to take us the rest of today and some of next week to find out what a form is. But there are other words that we can use. Plato also called these ideas. The reason, the value to calling them ideas is to draw attention to the fact that they are different from physical objects. They're different from bodies. The problem, though, with calling them ideas is the fact that that word suggests that they exist only in minds. Plato's forms actually exist above and apart from human minds. And so, therefore, we can call them ideals. Now, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to approach Plato's theory of the forms from a number of different angles. I'm going to use different examples, different illustrations. Each time I start a new example, I'm covering the same territory from a somewhat different angle. It's a little bit like the book of Revelation, which looks at the church age from a sequence of different angles, all right? So what I'll do is give you different examples, all of which approach the same topic from a different perspective. Example number one. I think it's helpful in understanding Plato's theory of the forms to think a while about circles, a circle. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the notion of a circle, and let's clean our blackboard off a little bit. Is that a circle? Be a pretty sick circle if it were. Let's try. Is that? Nah, that won't work either. Now let's assume on this third one that I've got some kind of a little contraption that really helps me do it. That's not bad. But is that a circle? Somebody give me a definition. Who took math? Who was a math major in college? Somebody give me a definition of a circle. Yes.
That is points equidistant from a given point called the center.
Beautiful. Let's repeat that for everybody in our radio audience here. I'll repeat it since they can't hear you. You said a circle is a set of an enclosed set of points, each of which is equidistant from another point that we call the center. All right? That's right. That'll do. You'd get an A in a math course for that. Now, there's one little tricky point to that definition of a circle. In geometry, you learn that the line that makes up the circle has length but no width. Remember that from geometry? Now let's focus on that. Why must the line that makes up the perimeter of a circle, why must it have length but no width? Do you know the answer?
You're going to go into the definition of the point being placed without depth or width or size.
Yeah, well, for one thing, a point in geometry has location, but it has no extension. And there are reasons for that. Well, let's just take this segment of this figure that I've drawn on the blackboard here, and let's magnify this several hundred times. Now, if the line that makes up the perimeter of the circle has any width at all, then how many points have we got crossing that line? An infinite number of points. And if we have an infinite number of points, then how many radii do we have from each of those points to the center? We have an infinite number of radii. That's why the line that makes up the perimeter of a circle must have no width at all, because then you've got no way of determining which of those points is actually going to be is actually going to mark the terminus of the radius. Is it difficult? This is a really tough question. Is it difficult to draw a line that has length but no width? Is that something very hard to do? Is it even impossible to do? You bet your life it is. All right. Now, if you followed me so far, one thing we're leading to is this conclusion. It's impossible for any figure that you and I might ever encounter in this world to qualify as a true circle. You and I could never see a true circle in this world. Because a true circle must be a figure, the perimeter of which has length but no width, and those kinds of lines just don't exist in this world. So, my point is this. Plato would tell you that what you and I have dealt with all of our lives are not real circles. They are copies of the real circle. They are imitations of the real circle. Where does the real circle, where does the true circle exist, since it doesn't exist in the lower world? The answer is obvious. It can only exist in this other world, in this ideal world, in this perfect, unchanging world that Plato calls the world of the forms. Now, please notice that when we talk about the perfect circle, we're talking about something that has to exist. What would happen to geometry if all of a sudden we decided that circularity didn't exist? What have we been talking about all of our lives? Certainly, the perfect circle exists. But it must exist in a different kind of reality than the world than the world of bodies. Another question, or another issue. Notice that the true nature of circularity, the true nature of the perfect circle, has to be the same for everybody. We're not dealing with an idea that could be the case for some people and not be the case for others. Imagine somebody who says, imagine Saddam Hussein, who says, well, that's a circle for you Western-style capitalists, but no self-respecting Muslim is going to regard that as a circle. Wait a minute. The true nature of a circle is irrespective of culture, training, education, anything else. So what we're dealing with is an idea that must exist and that must be the same for everybody and that cannot change at all. Another example. This is now example number 2. I want you to focus on the number 1, all right? What is the number 1? Is that the number 1? Well, is that the number 1? Is that the number 1? We got some people saying no in the back of the class. If these aren't the number 1, what are they? Who's giving me this smart aleck answer? Oh, those are what?
Numeral.
What's a numeral? Oh, these are representations of the number 1. Oh, these are symbols. The number 1 is something distinct from various markings or signs that we use to refer to it. Oh, okay. Oh, but now, wait a minute, though. That still raises the question, that leaves us with the question, what is the number one? Let's hear from somebody else here. I'm tired of hearing from you. What is the number one? If it isn't identical with the symbols or references that we use, what is it? Would it be safe to say that the number one is an idea? How many like that idea? Suggestion. I got a few friends here. How about if we say the number one is a concept? Same thing. Idea and a concept are the same thing. That's a pretty good... What you have here are symbolic ways of referring to a concept, an idea. All right? Where do ideas exist? Where's the only place any idea can exist? In a mind. I mean, listen, if you're ever out with someone and he says, oh, there goes an interesting idea, and he grabs at it, ask him if he's lived in Gainesville recently, all right? That may not be very funny, but ideas exist only in minds. All right? Next question. Suppose every human mind ceased to exist. Would the number one cease to exist? How many think the number one would continue to exist even if every human mind went out of existence? How many of you think the number one... Boy! Now what about you who aren't raising your hands? Are you... Say what?
Symbols of the concept.
The concept. We've already agreed that those lines on the blackboard aren't the number one. Those of you who haven't been raising your hands, are you with us here? Okay? Well, here's what I'm getting at. I believe, I really do, I believe the number one is eternal. When I tell my freshman students that, some of them hear the music from the Twilight Zone. They really do. You don't know how they get upset. They start jumping up and down saying, what do you mean? If every human mind ceased to exist, the number one would cease to exist. No, it wouldn't. Now, it's a little hard to prove that. Right. Write that down. It's a little hard to prove that. But I believe that nonetheless. But you see, what I do then, I usually do this with my students at the first class. I just kind of try and really mess them up a little bit. I say, now look, if the number one has always existed, and think about the absurdities that would follow if the number one didn't exist eternally. Think about, when did it start existing? Right? You ever thought about that? When did the number one begin to exist? If it's eternal, and if the number one can only exist in a mind, doesn't that require an eternal mind to ground this eternal idea? Ooh, I always have some kids who say, hey, wait a minute, that means God. And I say, well, congratulations, They catch on a little bit. That means God. Now, I want to warn you. Plato didn't go this far. Later Platonists did. Do any of you know the name of the later Platonist that I'm thinking about who followed this train of thought? Plotinus? Well, I'm thinking about a Christian Platonist. Augustine. One of the important ways in which Christianity and Platonism are going to become related is this. Christianity is going to provide, actually some other thinkers did it before Augustine, but in Christian Platonists like Augustine, these forms, ideas that Plato is going to talk about are going to be located as eternal thoughts in the mind of God. But Plato, unfortunately, could never see that. So Plato leaves us with the idea that these forms, the perfect circle, perfect truth, perfect justice, perfect goodness, just sort of exist or float around in this non-spatial, non-temporal world. It's a very inadequate theory that Plato leaves us with. He was heading in the right direction, but because he stopped short of an eternal mind in which these ideas existed, it's all kind of inadequate. Well, example number 3. This may be my last. No, there are 2 other examples I have to use. I may not have time to do both of them. For this 3rd example, remember I've talked about the perfect circle. I've talked about the number 1, which at least, whether or not you go all the way with Augustine and me, that it's an eternal idea in the mind of God, the number 1 must be a perfect, unchanging idea that exists somewhere, somehow. What I want to do thirdly now is talk about the difference between sets and members of sets. What is a set? What's a set of things? You all studied that in college. A set is a group of things. A set is a collection of 2 or more things that have something essential in common. And so we can talk about the set of all trees or the set of all dogs. Let's pick on the set of all dogs, and let's picture the set of all dogs as a circle, all right? Now every set, well, this isn't true. There are some sets that have no members, but let's here talk about, if we're dealing with the set of all dogs, then we can also talk about particular dogs. So I'll indicate those particular dogs with an X that I place inside the circle. Let's say that this X represents Lassie. All right? Lassie, come home. And this X represents Benji. These are real dogs that exist in the real world, but they are members of a set, okay? And give me the names of some other dogs. Rin Tin Tin. Yes, great. Okay. Now, stay with me here. Where do the particular members of any set exist? In which of our 2 worlds do the particular members of any set exist? Lower world. I mean, where does Lassie exist? Where does Rin Tin Tin exist? They exist as particular things in the world of bodies, all right? But now, let's forget the particular things, the particular members of a set, and let's focus on that set of essential properties that requires us to group all of these particular animals into the same set. Now, what we need is a name for this set of properties. Why don't we call it Dogginess? Dogginess is a word we use to refer to the essential properties that make an animal a dog and not a horse. Dogginess. Some of us are old enough to remember Patti Page singing, "How much is that doggy in the window?" The doggy to which Patti Page referred was a particular animal in the lower world of bodies. If Patti Page had sung, "How much is that dogginess in the window?" we would know that she never graduated from the 8th grade. You can't see dogginess is the form, the essence, the set of essential properties that define what a dog is. And so dogginess exists in Plato's world of the forms. Plato seems to believe that in the world of the forms there is a pattern or an ideal or an archetype or a model for every class of objects that exists in this world. Next example, and hopefully by the time I finish this one, you'll, the idea of a true definition.
Believes that there's a class of objects that exists. Is that in the lower world you're speaking of?
Okay, let me clarify. When we distinguish between a set and the members of a set, the members of the set are particular things that exist in the lower world. The defining properties of the set itself belong to the higher world. Okay? Now, in some of Plato's dialogues, he has Socrates involved in a debate over the meanings of certain key words. I'll give you a couple of examples. In one dialogue, Socrates is talking to somebody, Euthyphro, and the question is, what is piety? What is piety? And so Euthyphro says, well, I can tell you what piety is. And I'm going to paraphrase. These are not the exact words of Euthyphro. I'm going to translate them into the Bible Belt culture, all right? This is Bubba. Bubba giving us a definition of piety for southern Mississippi, let's say. Bubba says, piety is going to church on Sunday. Piety is reading your Bible. Piety is praying over a meal. Piety is tithing. Amen. So old Bubba gives us all of these as part of his definition of piety. Here's Socrates' answer. He says, Bubba, I perceive that you are truly a religious man, but you have not given me the essence of piety. You have given me examples of piety. Have you ever asked somebody to define a term and all they've done is give you examples? You're walking down a street in Manhattan and you say, what's a skyscraper? And somebody says, well, there's the Chrysler Building, there's the Empire's. No, those are examples. I want to know the nature, the essence of skyscraper. Now, when Socrates gets involved in a disagreement like this, what he's trying to get people to see is that if all of these particular things are examples of piety, there must be something that they have in common. And that which they have in common, the universal element, actually constitutes the definition of that term. Actually, what I'm giving you here is simply another way of what I said earlier. We could talk about the set of all pious actions. All right? Suppose Socrates had said, instead of giving me the definition of piety, tell me what the set of pious actions is. And old Bubba says, piety's going to church on Sunday, piety's reading your Bible, piety's praying every day, piety's tithing, etc., etc. That's piety. Socrates says, no, those are members of the set of pious actions. I want to know the defining characteristic, the essence, the nature. Now, in the case of true definitions, the examples of a thing represent particular things that exist in the lower world. The universal, the common element, which constitutes the true definition, must be the form of piety that exists in the higher world. All right? Well, let's begin to wind this down. Let's get down to the bottom line. Plato believes that human beings exist in two different worlds. The one world we know all about. That's the world of bodies, the world we experience through our senses. The higher world is the tough one to understand. We can use all kinds of tricks and devices to try and get people to grasp the nature of this higher world, the existence of the higher world. But here's what's up there. All of the moral concepts and standards are part of the higher world. Plato believes in an objective, unchanging standard of right and wrong. That's a part of the world of the forms. Perfect truth is up there. Perfect justice, perfect goodness, perfect piety is up there. The numbers are up there. The number 1 is in the world of the forms. The perfect circle is up there in the world of the forms. The perfect triangle. Now, this higher world, watch this now. Remember I told you a few minutes ago that the lower world is really Heraclitus' contribution to philosophy. Everything in the lower world is exactly what Heraclitus said it was. It's a changing particular thing. The higher world, this world of the forms, is Parmenides' contribution to philosophy. Remember old Parmenides? He said, nothing changes. Everything remains the same. There is no motion, no change. Remember the nonsense we got into with Parmenides. And it was nonsense. The mistake that Parmenides made, get this, the mistake that Parmenides made was trying to take that world of rational ideas and bring it down here to this world. That's why Zeno got involved in all of that nonsense. Parmenides was onto something when he said there is a world known by reason in which change is impossible. He was on the right track. He just failed to recognize that it's a different world. It's not this physical world. It's a spiritual, non-material world that we should have been talking about. So Plato's philosophy is actually a synthesis, a bringing together of something he learned from Heraclitus and something he learned from Parmenides, but it's transformed by Plato's own genius into a doctrine of two different worlds. A couple of questions and then we'll go. Anybody have any questions?
Sometimes referred to as the difference between being and becoming.
All right, good point. The question was, isn't this the difference that's often made between being and becoming? And the answer is yes. What we have down here is a world, the lower world, in which everything is in a state of becoming something else. What we have up here is a world of being in which there is no change. Think about it. The perfect circle can never change. What would it change into? The number 1 can never change. If it did change, what would it become? The number 2? The number 1 must be the number 1 forever, immutably. Anything else?
Soul.
The soul, that's something we'll have to wait. We can't do that in the time that's left. We'll talk about that next week. One last question.
Is the higher world, could it be considered a pattern?
Could the higher world be considered a pattern? Absolutely.